The courtroom fell dead silent as a battle-hardened canine growled at the star witness. Was this just instinct, or had the dog sensed a deadly lie? In that chilling moment, the jury's eyes widened and everything began to unravel. Here's what happened, but before we get into the story, drop a comment below. Let us know where you're watching from. The prosecutor's voice sliced through the thick silence like a razor, his tone dripping with the arrogance of a man certain he had already won. Lieutenant Voss, can you tell the court exactly what you witnessed that night? Voss leaned forward, his polished brass insignia catching the courtroom lights, casting small reflections that danced like tiny daggers across the wooden panels. His eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the jury as if selecting who to deceive first. Ladies and gentlemen, he began with an oily charm, I saw Captain Mercer, drunk and furious, standing over Lieutenant Hanley's bloodied body. The knife, his knife, was still in his hand. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, but at the defense table, Titan's low growl grew louder, more insistent, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the floor itself. The judge pounded his gavel, calling for order, but even the sharp cracks of wood couldn't drown out the primal warning that rumbled from Titan's chest. Cole sat frozen, his eyes never leaving Voss's face, watching every smirk, every carefully crafted lie spill from the man's mouth like poison. He wanted to stand, to shout the truth, to tear down the fabric of this sick performance, but years of discipline held him in place. His only motion was a subtle hand resting on Titan's back, a silent plea for his companion to hold his ground. But Titan was beyond calming now. His eyes locked on Voss with an intensity that felt almost human, as if he alone could see the dark stain of guilt dripping from the man's soul. The jury couldn't ignore it either. Their eyes darted between the snarling dog and the supposedly composed star witness, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Cole saw uncertainty flicker across their faces. Voss faltered, just for a heartbeat, his tongue darting nervously over his lips before he forced his smug mask back into place. But the damage was done. That single unguarded moment was all it took. Cole's attorney, a seasoned defender named Grant Holloway, rose slowly from his chair, his voice a low, deliberate thunder. Your Honor, he began, his gaze heavy with purpose, before we accept Lieutenant Voss's testimony as gospel, perhaps we should consider why a highly trained military K9, a dog that has served with distinction in combat zones most of us couldn't even survive, reacts to him as if he's staring down the very man responsible for this entire charade. A stunned hush fell over the courtroom, all eyes now on the judge, who adjusted his glasses with a troubled sigh. Outside, the skies had darkened, thunder rolling low across the horizon like nature itself was holding its breath. And in that suspended moment, amidst the tension, the lies, and the heavy scent of betrayal, Captain Cole Mercer realized something profound. This battle was far from over, but for the first time, the enemy had flinched. And sometimes that's all a good soldier needs to start turning the tide. The air was a furnace of choking smoke and acrid gunpowder, the horizon blurred by the shimmering heat and the chaos of war. And yet through the haze, Captain Cole Mercer moved with the precision of a man who had long since made peace with danger. His boots pounded against the scorched earth as enemy rounds cracked the air like lightning, each one a deadly promise aimed to stop him dead in his tracks. But he wasn't running from the fight. He was running toward it, toward the mangled wreckage of an armored convoy, now engulfed in flames, its twisted metal screaming against the oppressive desert wind. A faint, ragged yelp had cut through the chaos, a sound so faint it might have been imagined, if not for the way it sliced straight through Cole's chest like a blade. That was the moment he saw him, Titan, pinned beneath the wreckage, his flank torn and bleeding, his eyes wild with pain and fear, but still burning with the raw defiance of a soldier refusing to surrender. Without hesitation, Cole dropped to his knees, ignoring the molten heat radiating off the metal, his bare hands blistering as he wrenched aside the debris. The searing pain of burned skin meant nothing. Titan was alive, and that was all that mattered. With a final heave, he pulled the dog free, cradling the trembling mass of muscle and loyalty against his chest as mortar blasts shook the ground beneath them. Cole sprinted through that battlefield with Titan clutched against him, the dog's blood mingling with the sweat and grime streaking his face, every heartbeat a countdown to whether they'd make it out alive. When they finally reached the cover of their position, medics swarmed, but Titan refused to be taken from Cole's side, his bloodied muzzle pressing against the captain's chest in a silent plea. A vow sealed in that moment that no matter what came next, they were bound. Through the long, agonizing weeks that followed, Cole sat by Titan's side as he healed, reading aloud from battered field journals, his voice a low, steady comfort in the sterile hum of the military infirmary. And when the day came that Titan stood again, his body scarred but his spirit unbroken, he walked straight to Cole and sat by his side without a command, his eyes speaking volumes where words would fail. From that moment forward, they were inseparable, two battle-worn souls navigating a world that seemed to have forgotten what loyalty meant. Titan wasn't just a dog anymore. He was a soldier, a guardian, and the only living being Cole trusted with his life. And as the days turned into years and the battlefields changed from foreign deserts to courtrooms filled with silent judgments, that bond never wavered. Because some promises, once forged in fire, are stronger than steel and more unbreakable than the lies that seek to tear them apart. It started with a handshake that lingered a second too long, a practiced smile stretched tight across Voss's face, his grip cold and deliberate, like a snake coiling around its prey. Cole had seen men like him before, slick operators who never dirtied their hands but always found a way to profit from the blood and sweat of better men. Voss strutted through the base like he owned every inch of it, his uniform pressed to perfection, boots gleaming brighter than his service record ever could. He made fast friends with those in high places and faster deals behind closed doors, his silver tongue weaving lies so seamlessly they might as well have been gospel. But it wasn't until Cole's name came under fire that he understood just how deep Voss's ambitions ran. The call came in the dead of night, a frantic voice on the other end informing him that Lieutenant Hanley had been found beaten unconscious, his blood staining the walls of the officers' quarters. And before dawn broke, military police were at Cole's door armed with an accusation that tasted like betrayal. They found the combat knife with Cole's initials etched into the hilt, tucked neatly in his locker, its blade caked in drying blood. It was too neat, too perfectly placed, the kind of evidence that didn't just appear. It was planted, calculated down to the last gruesome detail. And when the footage from the security cameras inexplicably disappeared, erased from both primary and backup systems, Cole didn't need to hear Voss's name to know who had orchestrated this web of deceit. But knowing and proving were two different battles entirely. Voss walked the base with a confidence born of hidden alliances, his smirk growing wider every time their paths crossed, as if daring Cole to challenge him in a fight he couldn't possibly win. Titan, always by Cole's side, grew restless around Voss, his hackles rising, his teeth bared in silent warning every time that serpent came near. But Cole couldn't act on instinct alone. He needed proof, and proof was a luxury Voss made sure stayed just out of reach. As the weeks dragged on and the trial loomed closer, Cole's world shrank into a suffocating cage of suspicion and isolation. Friends distanced themselves, afraid to stand too close to a man already convicted in the court of public opinion. Rumors swirled like poison through the ranks, whispers of a violent temper, of hidden demons clawing their way to the surface. And through it all, Voss thrived, his lies growing roots so deep that even the most loyal began to doubt. But what Voss didn't understand was that Cole had been through worse fires than this. And with Titan at his side, he wasn't about to let a coward in uniform bury him with fabricated truths. Because a man who's been betrayed knows how to wait, how to watch, and when the moment comes, how to strike back with a vengeance, sharp enough to cut through even the most carefully spun lies. The walls of Fort Overton seemed to hum with secrets, the kind that lived in shadowed corners and behind locked doors, where clearance badges mattered more than truth. At night, when the base settled into uneasy silence, those whispers grew louder. carried on the faint hiss of late-night radios and the muted thud of boots pacing corridors where no patrols were scheduled. Cole felt it in his bones, that familiar prickling sensation that told him something was deeply wrong, something far more dangerous than the lies stacked against him in that courtroom. He moved through the hallways with calculated steps, ears tuned to fragments of conversation that vanished the moment he turned a corner. Shipments arriving under new authorization. Keep it off the books, one voice had muttered near the abandoned comms room. Another night near the motor pool, he caught a different whisper, hushed and urgent. Voss says the captain's finished. One more push and he's out of the picture for good. Each time Cole tried to chase down a source, he found only locked doors and empty rooms, the scent of betrayal lingering heavier than the oil-slicked air. And through it all, Titan walked beside him, his movements unnaturally tense, his muscles coiled as if he were stalking prey unseen by human eyes. Whenever Voss crossed their path, Titan would freeze, his lips curling back just enough to reveal gleaming teeth, his eyes narrowed into a stare so intense even hardened soldiers gave the animal a wide berth. Voss always played it cool, offering that insincere smirk and a mockingly respectful nod. But beneath the surface, his pulse betrayed him, a faint vein twitching at his temple every time Titan growled low enough for only him to hear. Cole knew then that Titan sensed what others refused to see. Voss wasn't just a corrupt officer padding his pockets with dirty money. He was orchestrating something larger, something that could get good men killed. The whisper spoke of black market weapon caches moving through channels meant for humanitarian aid, of arms disappearing before they ever reached their intended destinations. It explained the unexplained supply shortages, the missions that went sideways without warning, the sudden influx of high-grade arms showing up in the wrong hands across conflict zones. But every time Cole tried to bring these suspicions to light, doors slammed shut, and records mysteriously vanished. Those who might have stood with him kept their heads down, afraid of becoming the next target in Voss's ruthless campaign. And while the walls of the base echoed with rumors no one dared confirm, Cole understood that the fight wasn't just for his freedom anymore. It was for the very soul of the uniform he wore. Titan remained his only constant, his only reminder that loyalty still had a place in a world drowning in betrayal. And though the road ahead was dark and dangerous, Cole knew this much. Where there were whispers, there was truth buried beneath the lies, and he'd keep digging until he dragged it screaming into the light. The courtroom felt colder that morning, the kind of cold that didn't come from a faulty air vent, but from the unspoken judgment hanging heavy in the air, thick and suffocating, like a storm cloud ready to burst. Captain Cole Mercer sat, ramrod straight, at the defense table. Every muscle locked in place as though loosening even a fraction would let the weight of it all crush him completely. Across the room, the prosecution wasted no time painting him into a monster. Their voices laced with manufactured sympathy, carefully measured outrage, and thinly veiled contempt. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor began, pacing before them like a predator sizing up its prey, "we are here today not just to try a man, but to confront the dangerous reality of what happens when a soldier's discipline unravels and leaves violence in its wake." One by one, the grim photographs were displayed on the screen, each one more brutal than the last. The swelling, the cracked ribs, the dark purple bruises smeared across Lieutenant Hanley's jaw. Each click of the remote was like the bang of a gavel against Cole's fading hopes. And through it all, the jury watched him with the eyes that had already decided the end of the story before hearing the middle. But while Cole sat in silent agony, Titan was a monument of defiance at his side, his massive form still as stone, eyes like burning coals trained on every witness who took the stand and spoke their rehearsed lines against his handler. Not a single twitch of his ears, not a single movement, until the doors creaked open and Lieutenant Darren Voss strode in. The shift was immediate and electric. Titan's ears snapped forward, his head lifted, and the low, guttural growl that rumbled from his chest seemed to crawl across the floor like a living thing. It was a sound primal enough to hush the entire room, a sound that made the jurors lean back slightly, their confidence shaken, their certainty cracking at the edges. Voss walked slower now, his shoulders squared. that same smug grin stretching across his face as he took the stand. But Cole didn't miss the way his eyes darted toward Titan, nor the faint tension in his jaw when the dog refused to break his piercing gaze. Captain Mercer, Voss began, his voice slick with practiced falsehood, was always unpredictable, volatile. We all worried what might happen when his temper finally snapped. His words were daggers dipped in honey, sweet to the untrained ear, but dripping poison all the same. Yet for the first time since this nightmare began, Cole saw something he hadn't expected. A bead of sweat forming at Voss's temple, a slight tremor in his hand as he took a sip of water, his fingers clutching the glass, just a little too tight. Titan's growl deepened, his eyes unblinking, locked onto the man spinning the noose with every lie he uttered. And as the jurors glanced from Voss to the K9, who had never once reacted to any other witness, a new thought began to flicker behind their eyes. What if the dog, a creature trained to detect threats and deception with a precision no human could match, knew something they didn't? And in that charged moment, as Titan's growl seemed to vibrate through the courtroom floor, the balance of the trial began, ever so slightly, to tip. Voss leaned forward on the stand, his hands clasped together. Like a preacher delivering a sermon, his voice smooth and carefully modulated to drip with sincerity as he spun his tale. Captain Mercer stumbled in, drunk beyond reason, he said, his eyes scanning the jury with practiced precision, pausing just long enough on each face to plant the seeds of his carefully crafted lie. He was ranting about betrayal, his fists clenched, his eyes wild, and then his voice broke slightly, a masterful touch of false vulnerability. Then he attacked Lieutenant Hanley without warning. I tried to intervene, but there was nothing I could do against his rage. But before he could finish his next rehearsed sentence, the air in the courtroom shifted, thickened with a sudden, suffocating tension that seemed to press against every chest in the room. Titan rose from his position beside Cole, his powerful muscles coiled under a coat of bristling fur, the low rumble in his throat starting as a warning and building into a sound so primal it seemed to echo from the stone walls themselves. His lips curled back with deliberate menace, exposing canines sharpened by the brutal realities of combat. His eyes locked on Voss with a stare so fierce it seemed to cut through every lie hanging in the air. A collective gasp rolled through the spectators, a wave of startled unease that silenced even the most skeptical among them. The judge's gavel came down hard, a sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot through the chamber, his voice booming as he called for order, but not even the authority of the bench could mask the raw truth laid bare by the K9's instinctive response. Voss froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for everyone in that room to see something he couldn't hide. A flicker of fear, a subtle tightening of his throat as he swallowed hard, his confident facade cracking at the edges. Titan took a slow, deliberate step forward, his growl deepening to a sound that vibrated through the floor and settled in every spine like an unshakable warning. Cole didn't say a word, didn't need to. He simply placed a firm hand on Titan's back, steadying the storm raging beneath the surface. But he knew in that moment the damage was done. The jury exchanged glances now filled with hesitation, their previous certainty crumbling under the weight of a truth they couldn't explain but could no longer ignore. Because in a world filled with human lies and courtroom theater, sometimes it took the raw, unfiltered instinct of a battle-forged soul to speak the loudest. And as Titan sat back down, his burning gaze never once leaving Voss's trembling hands, it became clear to everyone watching this trial wasn't just about evidence anymore. It was about truth, and truth had just bared its teeth. The air in the courtroom turned electric, charged with a tension so sharp it felt like a taut wire stretched to the point of snapping. Grant Holloway, Cole's defense attorney, stood slowly, his every movement deliberate, his expression carved from stone as he turned to face the jury. His voice, calm but razor-edged, cut through the thick silence. Ladies and gentlemen, we've heard the prosecution's version of events, but it's time we deal in facts, not stories. He moved to the evidence display with the slow certainty of a man who knew he was about to detonate the very foundation of the prosecution's case. He held up the first piece of damning evidence, a series of phone records projected onto the courtroom screen, each time-stamped call a nail in the coffin of Voss's crumbling testimony. Lieutenant Voss, Holloway began, his tone deceptively mild, can you explain why your personal phone was in regular contact with known arms dealer Vincent Kalecki in the weeks leading up to this incident? Voss shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening as a bead of sweat formed at his temple. His voice came out thin, strained under the growing weight of undeniable truth. I. Those calls were part of an investigation, he stammered, but Holloway was already advancing. Flipping to the next slide, a spreadsheet of financial records that painted a far darker picture. Investigation? Holloway echoed, his brow arching. Is that what we're calling unreported wire transfers now? Because according to these bank statements, Lieutenant, you received over $75,000 in deposits from offshore accounts registered under shell corporations connected to Kalecki's operation. That doesn't sound like a sanctioned investigation to me. That sounds like a payoff. A murmur of shock rippled through the courtroom, and for the first time, the confident mask Voss wore began to crack, his shoulders sagging under the invisible weight of his own unraveling lies. Holloway wasn't finished. With a practiced flick of his hand, he signaled the tech operator to cue the final blow. The lights dimmed as grainy but unmistakable footage appeared on the screen, silent, damning, and undeniable. There, under the cold glow of a timestamp, was Voss himself, captured by a hidden backup camera, slipping into the restricted area where Cole's locker stood. The jury leaned forward, breaths held captive, as they watched Voss methodically retrieve a bloodied combat knife from inside his jacket and carefully place it among Cole's belongings. The footage played twice, each time sinking the dagger of betrayal deeper. Silence reigned as the lights came back up, the truth laid bare in every horrified glance exchanged across the jury box. Voss sat frozen, his lips parted, but no words finding their way past the crushing weight of his exposure. And across the room, Titan sat unmoving, his fierce gaze locked on the man who had tried to destroy everything his handler stood for. In that moment, the facade shattered completely, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Cole saw a clear path through the smoke and ruin of his life, a path paved by truth, loyalty, and the unwavering bond of a soldier and his dog. Voss sat hunched on the witness stand now, his once pristine uniform wrinkled with the weight of every lie unraveling under the searing glare of the courtroom lights. His hands, which had delivered smooth gestures and confident testimonies just days ago, now trembled visibly as he gripped the armrests, his knuckles pale and bloodless. Holloway advanced like a predator, scenting final victory, his voice low and deliberate, each question slicing through the room with surgical precision. Lieutenant Voss, when did you first contact Vincent Kalecki? Holloway's tone was ice wrapped in steel, giving no room for evasion. Voss swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly, eyes flickering to Titan, sitting at attention just feet away. The dog hadn't moved in the last 10 minutes, his unblinking stare fixed on Voss, like a living reminder of the truth that no courtroom trick could erase. I don't recall the exact date, Voss stammered, his voice cracking under the pressure, sweat beading along his hairline, despite the chill of the air-conditioned room. Perhaps you'll recall this, Holloway shot back, slamming down a printed transcript of phone logs onto the witness stand. You spoke with Kalecki at exactly 2:17 a.m. on the night before Captain Mercer was arrested. Would you like to explain that? Voss's lips parted, but no sound came out. His carefully crafted defenses were collapsing faster than he could rebuild them, and every panicked glance toward the jury revealed how completely the tide had turned. They weren't seeing a brave officer standing against a violent man anymore. They were watching a coward caught in the final moments of his own deceit. Titan's eyes never left Voss, his calm, focused posture somehow louder than any outburst could have been. And with each silent second that passed, Under that unyielding gaze, the jury seemed to draw further from Voss and closer to the man he had tried to ruin. Holloway leaned in for the kill, his voice dropping to a near whisper that echoed through the deadly quiet room. "Tell me, Lieutenant, when you placed that knife in Captain Mercer's locker, did you hesitate? Did you wonder for even a second what it would cost to condemn an innocent man? Or were you too busy counting the money?" Voss shook his head in denial, but his words tumbled over each other in a frantic, incoherent mess. I didn't, I mean, that's not how, it's not what it looks like. But even he seemed to realize the futility of it as his voice trailed off into nothingness. Holloway turned back to the jury, his job done, his closing words hanging heavy in the air. "The evidence speaks for itself. And when evidence wasn't enough, Titan did what we all failed to do. He saw through the lies from the very start." The courtroom fell into a stunned silence as Titan slowly stood and took his place beside Cole once more, his presence a living testament to loyalty, truth, and the justice that even the darkest deception couldn't extinguish. And in that moment, everyone in the room knew Voss had already lost. The moment the foreman rose to his feet, the entire courtroom seemed to suspend its breath in the fragile stillness between hope and despair. Cole sat rigid, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles had turned bone white, his heart thundering against his ribs like a caged animal desperate for release. Titan sat beside him, motionless, his eyes fixed on the 12 men and women whose decision would determine the course of his handler's life. And then, in a voice that seemed to echo louder than the gavel, louder than the years of service and sacrifice that had been dragged through the mud, the foreman spoke the words that shattered the weight crushing Cole's chest. "Not guilty." For a split second, the words didn't seem real, just faint sounds suspended in the thick air of the courtroom. But then they hit like a tidal wave, crashing through every wall of fear and doubt that had held Cole prisoner. A breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding broke free in a ragged exhale, his shoulders sagging under the sudden and overwhelming weight of freedom. His vision blurred as the flood of emotion surged. Relief, vindication, sorrow for the trust that had been betrayed, and gratitude so profound it made his throat tighten. Titan pressed closer against him, sensing the emotional storm, his powerful head resting against Cole's leg, his silent reassurance more comforting than any spoken word. As the courtroom emptied, the jurors rose one by one, but instead of filing past without a glance, several of them paused, their faces soft with something more than mere sympathy. They approached Titan with the reverence one might show a soldier returning from war. They knelt before him, their hands reaching out with tentative respect, fingers brushing against his thick coat as they whispered words of gratitude. "You knew the truth before any of us," one elderly woman murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for standing when the rest of us didn't." Another juror, a man who had seemed the most skeptical throughout the trial, crouched low, his eyes glistening as he ran a trembling hand over Titan's scarred flank. "You saved him," he said quietly, his voice barely audible, but heavy with conviction. "And you reminded us what loyalty really looks like." In that moment, Titan wasn't just a dog, he was a living testament to unwavering faith, a silent warrior who had stood against the tide of lies when no one else would. Cole rose to his feet slowly, his hand resting gently on Titan's broad shoulders, his heart still thudding, but now with the powerful rhythm of a man who had survived the storm. Together they turned toward the courtroom doors, their steps measured and steady, their bond stronger than any chain of circumstance that had tried to tear them apart. And as the doors swung open to the bright light beyond, the air smelled different, cleaner, free of the heavy scent of betrayal that had hung over their lives for so long. Titan lifted his head high, his ears perked, and with one final glance back at the room where truth had finally found its voice, they stepped out into the world again. Not as victims of a broken system, but as victors who had faced the darkness and walked out the other side with their honor and their bond intact. The air was cool and crisp, the kind that tastes different after surviving a storm, like the world itself had been scrubbed clean of its bitterness and left only the raw purity of a new beginning. The sky stretched wide above the courthouse, painted in soft strokes of pale gold and crimson, as if the dawn itself had been waiting for this moment to break free. Cole knelt beside Titan at the top of those cold granite steps, his knees pressing against stone still damp with the chill of night, his hand resting on the solid warmth of Titan's powerful shoulders. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, his chest loosened, his breath flowing freely as he looked into the eyes of the dog, who had walked through fire and shadow with him. Never wavering, never doubting. His voice came rough and uneven, thick with the weight of everything unspoken. "We did it, boy." Titan responded the only way he knew how, pressing his muzzle hard against Cole's chest, his body trembling just slightly with the release of a tension that had held him rigid for weeks. And in that quiet exchange, without the need for grand speeches or tearful declarations, a silent promise was made. No matter how uncertain the road ahead might be, no matter what battles remained, they would face them side by side, as they always had, as they always would. The courthouse behind them began to stir. With life again, reporters gathering like scavengers drawn to the scent of a fresh story, their cameras flashing, voices rising in a chaotic clamor. But Cole paid them no mind. For once, the noise didn't matter. The eyes of the world could bear witness or turn away, but the only eyes that ever truly saw him were the ones staring back at him now, full of trust, loyalty, and the kind of love that couldn't be broken by lies or betrayal. Slowly, Cole rose to his feet, his hand never leaving Titan's back as they stepped down the courthouse stairs together, each stride a quiet victory against the darkness that had tried to swallow them whole. And as they crossed through the growing crowd, something extraordinary happened. People parted to make way for them, not out of obligation or duty, but out of respect. There were no loud cheers, no parades or celebrations, just the simple, profound acknowledgement of two warriors who had fought and survived, not with weapons or brute force, but with honor and an unbreakable bond forged in the fires of loyalty. With every step away from the courthouse, the shadows of the past grew smaller, swallowed by the growing light of a new day. And though their path remained uncertain, with dangers and hardships still waiting beyond the horizon, one thing was now irrefutably clear. Sometimes the strongest testimony doesn't come from the witness stand or the words of men sworn under oath. It comes from the silent, unwavering loyalty of a soldier's best friend. The kind of loyalty that stands firm when the world falls apart and walks beside you long after the battle is over.